We are really excited today. We're going live on a bunch of different social media platforms at the same time. So excited to interact with a lot of different people, not just from YouTube, but Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, a bunch of others too, Periscope as well. So really excited, Evan. How are we doing today, man? What's cooking?
Oh, not too much. I was dealing with little vomiting episode this morning with some kids. So I thought, well, why don't we do an acute tummy upset video, and hopefully that'll help some people. A
Yeah, I
lot of
like it. It's
people
going to
at
be a good
first,
topic to hit.
anytime anybody's sick now, everybody's like COVID until proven innocent, right? It's like whether you have sinus issues or smell issues, taste issues, tummy issues, people freak out. But, luckily there are some really good at-home rapid tests that you can do now with a 15-minute result. Now, it's difficult to find those. You may have to order them online, but Abbott makes a good one. So if people are at home and they're worried, they get sick, they're like, what do I do? A lot of people, they're just stuck in this fear response. Like, oh my God, I'm going to die as soon as anything's wrong. So you can get these rapid tests and have them at home. And so I think that's a good strategy just out of the gate for people. If you get into acute issues, whether it's vomiting, diarrhea, sinus issues, sinus infections, tight chest, shortness of breath, whatever you think is going on, to me, before you feel like you got to run out and go to the hospital, I think it'd be good to do an at-home test, and then you could always go to a local clinic where you could get a rapid test. It's supposedly a little bit more, maybe a few percentage points more accurate than the at-home.
Yep, I think those are good things out of the gates. Now, one of the big topics we're hitting today is because your daughter had a little bit of a tummy upset over the weekend into today, and we're parents, we have kids. Obviously we see patients all over the world, and we deal with some of these acute tummy upsets where there's vomiting or acute diarrhea. And what are some natural strategies to fix that? What's the root cause? But what are some natural strategies to at least get it under control? So first off, Evan, how did you handle your daughter? What happened with her over the weekend, and what did you do that helped?
Yeah, she had sinus issues first, where she just had really, really tough time breathing out of her nose. So I tried to get her to do some sinus spray with a 5-year-old. They really don't want stuff squirted up their nose. So that wasn't too successful. We were able to get some Argentin in, which is a professional silver hydrosol. So we did a little bit of that orally, and then we hit some antimicrobial drops. So we did some liquid antimicrobials. It depends on what you got going on. For us, we did kind of a broad spectrum formula, but there's different ones that we may use. So olive leaf is a good option. There's some that are full spectrum, like microbe slayer use called biocidin drops can be helpful too. So few options. We're just kind of rotating through some of these. And then we are doing binders. So just because you don't know what's going on, if it's a bacteria or some sort of pathogen, it's going to be pooping out these, who knows, lipopolysaccharide, endotoxin, some kind of garbage. So we did do some binder. We did a half capsule of some binders before bed with applesauce. That seemed to calm things down. But then with the vomiting, we were talking about this before we hit record. The coolest thing was, and the most effective so far, was homeopathic. So we did 2 of them. We did arsenicum album, and then we did Nux, N-U-X, vomica. So those 2 homeopathics, I would say, really, really changed the progression and helped her go down the fork in the road where it stopped the vomiting. Now, is it possible that she just got everything out of her system and it was good on its own? Or is it possible these homeopathics really, stopped it? I've had a lot of good success personally and clinically with homeopathics. It's something that I didn't know a ton about until I started experimenting, but these are very, very good, safe things that can be tried. And worst case scenario, it's not hurt. It can only help. So arsenicum is going to be more for vomiting, and Nux is going to be more for the nausea. There's actually, if you look on the label, either one of these could be used for food poisoning, but I'm finding that Nux is better for the symptom of nausea, whereas arsenicum is better for the actual symptom of vomiting.
Very good. Excellent. So out of the gates here, what's the root cause? Most of the time I find when you have a root kind of tummy upset, it's usually going to be some kind of food poisoning thing out of the gate. So of course I think of, E. coli or some kind of toxigenic E. coli, or maybe a salmonella or a campylobacter, some kind of food poisoning bacteria out of the gates. It also could be a parasite too. I find food poisoning tends to be a little bit more acute. And that's kind of how you know. In the moment, it may not be clear enough. But out of the gates, like you mentioned, a couple different things. Silver can be helpful. Higher dose probiotics. Probiotics can be very helpful because, especially the bifidobacter and lactobacillus, because one, they're anti-inflammatory, so they bring the inflammation down in the gut. Probiotics are shown to help with gut permeability issues. So with the acute food poisoning or acute tummy stress, there could be a lot of gut permeability, which then increases the immune response because then you have all these toxins leaking into the bloodstream potentially and creating gut stress and immune stress. And then I would say after that, they're going to help crowd out a lot of the bad bugs. So if you had a big whack of E. coli or a big whack of Campylobacter or Salmonella, something like that, Listeria, it's going to help crowd some of it out. And so probiotics, I think, out of the gates for its many calming effects. And then I think you can look deeper and run a stool test if some of these issues are more chronic, right? Parasitic issues may be more chronic. And then, of course, my good old favorite ginger tea is wonderful because ginger is anti-inflammatory, has some mild antimicrobial benefits as well, especially bacteria, and also has some anti-biofilm benefits. So you can combine ginger with probiotics. You can combine ginger with some antimicrobials as well to kind of help those herbs to be more, let's just say, virulent, because you essentially are taking the shields out of these bacteria's, arms, right? Biofilms are the protective shields the bacteria use. And when you take the shields out, the bacteria are more vulnerable. And then the herbs work much better and they help kill them much better. So those are a couple of strategies out of the gates. Anything else, Evan, that you're doing?
We tried to go for the ginger tea. Her tummy was just so upset she couldn't keep liquids down. So we just said, okay, too intense right now. We're going to just let it rest. So luckily with the pellets of the homeopathy, she was able to just put it under her tongue. Therefore, she didn't have to take in any new liquid. So we tried to dose some other liquid tinctures that were a couple mils, but it was just too much. So luckily without it, we just gave the tummy a break, no more liquids, hit the homeopathics, and then boom, the gut's calm for now. So we're still in the middle of it at the time of this recording, but she has not vomited since we did those homeopathy remedies. So hopefully she's over the hump now.
Yeah, homeopathy is interesting. I don't see a lot of it as being like root causal. Like it's not fixing, like let's say your daughter ate some food or had a food allergen exposure or was eating while stressed, not enough stomach acid or got a bug. It may not fix that, but it's going to help control some of the symptoms, modulate the inflammation, kind of help bump physiology back into the normal direction, which kind of buys you time to fix whatever's going on. So I like that. I think that's a pretty good strategy out of the gates. I think also too is modifying.
Depend on it.
Yeah, I think also modifying.
I was just gonna say I'm not going to depend on it. Oh, I wasn't going to depend on it solely, but if I can buy her time, like you said, and then if we see in a week there's still an issue, then boom, we're going to go run urine or we're going to run stool.
Exactly. Yep. And I like the idea of either fasting out of the gate if it's really a bad infection and there's really a lot of nausea. You could also do things like bone broth are wonderful, just where you get a lot of nutrition, but it's pre-digested. So there's not much digestion that has to happen to grab that glycine or grab those fatty acids because it's pretty well digested. So some kind of a bone broth is wonderful. Some type of a ginger tea is great. Some type of collagen amino acids is great. I think all those are, really good strategies out of the gates just to kind of help provide nutrition, but not put a lot of stress on your tummy to be able to digest it and access it. Because when the gut's really inflamed, it can be stressful absorbing those nutrients.
Yeah, good point. She was complaining of stomach pain too. So as soon as her tummy settles down, I think she can handle liquid. What we're going to do, we've got a couple different formulas. I know you and I, we manufacture some, but there's also some other good professional competitor brands. There's one from Innate Response that I like. It's a GI like soothing formula that's got like some raspberry flavor into it. It's got glutamine, some larch tree extract. I believe it's got some mucin, chamomile, aloe, those type of blends. So kind of a leaky gut permeability support. Those are good in these situations too. When the gut's irritated, like you said, you don't know what it's from, right? It could be bacteria, virus, parasite, whatever it is. To me, honestly, at this point, it doesn't matter. I'm just in the acute phase of trying to calm her tummy down. So if I can get her to do over the period of today, a couple grams of glutamine with some of these aloe extracts, that's going to calm the gut down too. You and I've seen that clinically beneficial in like ulcerative colitis, Crohn's, any of these diverticulitis, any type of these gut flare-ups or autoimmune gut flares. We'll use some of these leaky gut remedies. So I would then use that as a crossover, right? I would use it in the same situation.
Yeah, exactly. Now, out of the gates, when we deal with a lot of these situations, we always want to understand root cause. Now, the nice thing about acute traumatic situations like in your situation here is the root cause usually is a one-off, right? It's going to be a food poisoning episode. It becomes more of an issue if it's an acute parasite and it lingers, but most of the time it's a one-off. And as long as someone's diet's reasonable and they have decent health, you don't really have to go super upstream and look at all of the underlying systems. You can kind of just do triage with natural medicine, which is kind of cool. Come in there with some of the different nutrients and the herbs that we talked about, support some of the lymphatic system with ginger or burdock root, right? Slippery elm's wonderful for the lymphs, wonderful for calming the gut lining. L-glutamine's also wonderful for calming. Aloe's also wonderful for gut lining. So there's a lot of great things that we can do to calm the gut lining, support barrier integrity, get the inflammation under control. We don't really have to worry about, getting the root, because usually that root's an isolated situation, especially if someone's relatively healthy and then they have an acute episode.
Right. And then your system's going to get back to baseline on its own. We're just kind of helping it. So it, like you said, it might not need much more attention than just a couple of days, which would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's pretty cool out of the gates. So we talk about diarrhea. A couple of things we can do with diarrhea is a lot of times you have to understand why the body is doing what it's doing. So the body is usually getting exposed to some kind of bacteria, parasite, some type of toxin that is very irritating on the gut lining. And the body is thinking, how can we dilute whatever that compound is, and flush it out of the body as fast as possible? So what the body's typically doing is saying, okay, let's bring a whole bunch of fluid and water into this system here, and let's flush it out. Let's increase motility time. Now, what that's going to do is it's going to screw up your electrolytes a lot of times. It's going to screw up your hydration status, and it's also going to make it hard to absorb nutrients. So what's the first thing we do? So the first thing is we can put some binders in so we can bind up those toxins so they're less irritating, less inflammatory. So our different binders could be activated charcoal, bentonite clay, different zeolites, different pectins. These fibers are great because they'll bind up that toxin and it'll make it less mobile, less inflammatory. It kind of puts straitjackets or handcuffs on it, right? And the next thing we're going to do is make sure we are hydrating, because the solution to pollution is dilution. So we want to make sure there is enough water there so we can dilute and not get dehydrated. And then the next thing is make sure there's enough electrolytes. Electrolytes are a big deal, because if we are low in sodium and potassium and magnesium, when you start having a lot of these bugs, what you start to notice is you may start getting dizzy or have vertigo or heart palpitations or just feel totally off. And a lot of that can be from a lot of the electrolyte issues due to the infection. And so if we get the electrolytes right, the hydration right, and then we also provide some good binders in there, that can prevent these toxins, one, from being as mobile and being as inflammatory, and that can make a better environment for the body to move the bowels out slower without losing all the nutrients as well.
Yeah, good point. And this is kind of an art, right? This is where the art comes in of medicine, when you're trying to integrate these things at the right time that someone can tolerate. So right now, if I try to give her a big cup of electrolytes, she might not be able to, because she's had trouble keeping down the liquid. So you kind of have to know when. Like, you might hear this and go, oh my God, I'm going to do all the things because I want to get better, but there can be an order of operations. So I think get your gut calmed down first. If you can go an hour or two, if you're in an active vomiting situation, if you can go an hour or two without vomiting, that might be, the coast might be clear enough for you to try to work some of the other stuff in, whether it's liquid tinctures to kill things, or if you're doing something like a biocidin or other antimicrobial drops we use, the dosage is usually so small that I think you can keep it down, because you're not going to have to do a ton of drops, right? If you could just do like 5 drops, that's tiny. Your body's barely going to recognize that. And if it's at the tongue, I don't think that's going to create more vomiting. But that's kind of where the art comes in, and paying attention to what's going on.
I agree. Doing some of the liquid drops are wonderful, because if you can't do a full capsule, hopefully you can, right? But if you can't, getting some liquid drops in there of some herbals can be super helpful. Maybe some silver. Also, like you mentioned, if you really have a hard time keeping things down, that's where a good IV fluids, IV electrolytes, IV nutrients may be a good idea, because that bypasses the whole digestive system. So then it gets right into your bloodstream and does what it has to do. So you can find some of these liquid IV services. They'll come to your house, or find a facility near you where you can pop in, get it done. Ideally, if it's this acute, you're probably better off paying the money and having someone come to your house. You probably feel a lot better. And I think it's better than going to an ER, unless you're, really in rough shape, then go to an ER. But if not, you're better off doing it at home, just because there's less infectious material, at home than in a hospital, right? So I think that's a good strategy out of the gates for sure.
Well, and to take it a step further, not only that, but when you do these mobile services, like I did this last summer, you're able to customize what you want. So hospital's not going to put glutathione in the IV like they did. They're
No,
not going to give you
no.
10 grams of vitamin C like I requested. So you're going to get a much, much better menu, if you will, of nutrients
Yes.
than if you were to go to the hospital.
Yep, I agree. I 100% agree. So first thing out of the gates, I would say is try to do liquid or even just fast. And then if you're really having a hard time with the nutrition, try to do liquid. Whether it's an elemental diet or some collagen amino acids or some bone broth, that's great. And if you can't keep the food down, ideally try to get some kind of an IV going on there. I think that's a good strategy out of the gates. I think the next thing that would probably happen, it would be like IV antibiotics if you absolutely had to. But ideally, we don't want to go there unless all the other natural strategies aren't working, right? So we want to really try the low-hanging fruit. What's going to have the best bang for the buck, the least amount of side effects, the least amount of collateral damage, and then kind of go up from there. So of course, try to look at what caused the problem. Did you eat some bad mayo? Did you eat some crazy seafood? What happened? Try to isolate the cause. If there's a lot of vomiting or diarrhea, vomiting, it's going to be harder because it's not moving through the intestinal tract. It's staying in the stomach essentially, and or upper small intestine and moving out, right? So you got to do things to calm yourself down. So I think the big things, like you mentioned, the homeopathics, I think are great. I think the probiotics are great too. I think ginger can be great for the vomiting components. But then everything else, I think the diarrhea stuff, the binders, the hydration, getting all that stuff kind of calmed down, the ginger, all that stuff's wonderful. Anything else you did besides the homeopathics for the vomiting, Evan?
No, so far that was all she could get down. But luckily, it's been good enough.
Cool. Yeah, that's really cool. I like that. All right. So out of the gates here, we're kind of hitting things like on an acute level, right? So patients are coming in, they have these acute symptoms. These are kind of some of the strategies we would look at. Of course, it's easy for some of these people to move into the chronic realm. I've had a lot of patients that are like, oh yeah, like 3 years ago, I went to this place and I ate this food and I felt really sick for a week or two. And then I started getting better, but I didn't get all the way better. And now this stuff is lingering. And so, of course, for some people, this type of acute scenario, you may get over it, but you may not all the way recover. And why is that? Well, you could get another kind of a parasite infection. You could get H. pylori. There could be a lingering food poisoning, which we see on some of the testing we do. We'll see some of the Shiga toxin, some of the toxigenic E. coli. What is it? The 0OH157H, right? This is the food poisoning type of E. coli that you see in the spinach once a year and such. So we'll see some of these things on testing, and some of these things can cross the acute level into the chronic sphere. And people that have had these experiences, they may not recover all the way. And then that's where we, I think, start to have to start integrating more stool testing to look at and see what's happening.
Yeah, well said. I mean, there's so many people that say they have Bali belly, right? They go to Bali or they go to
Yes.
Mexico or they go somewhere, they come back and they're never the same. And it's an interesting phenomenon because a lot of times we're just trying to find them at the acute phase, like, okay, binders, whatever. But then if they don't fully recover, or sometimes they'll reach out to us, we never got to help them in the acute phase. They're just coming to us in the chronic phase, like, hey, I've been sick for 3 years after this Mexico poisoning event. Then that's where we come in with the testing. You mentioned the infections. We'll see salmonella, we'll see giardia, we'll see crypto. If there was like a lake trip where maybe they got some freshwater contamination, or a backpacking trip where they got some parasites, we'll find that on stool tests pretty accurately. Gut inflammation we can measure. So that's where we might do a test for her, just because I do it a couple times a year. But if she gets over this, then I might not rush to do it right away. So it depends on the person, right?
Yeah. I mean, I have a lot of Australian patients, and it's funny in that culture. It's because they're so close to Bali. A lot of them will take trips over there. And of course, the Bali, I mean, it's like 1 out of every 2 of my Australian patients, they got sick in Bali. And it's actually a cultural thing. I looked it up, where a lot of them would do this raspberry cordial drink. It was a big thing, and they would bring it with them to Bali, and they would drink it preventatively while they're in Bali to mitigate the Bali belly. And I did a little research on it. Some of the berries that were used to make that drink actually have some anti-parasitic, antibacterial effects. So they're kind of taken, even though it's a sugary, kind of not so great drink, there's still some therapeutic benefits of some of those berries being antimicrobial. And so even people in Australia kind of know, okay, we'll take this raspberry cordial drink and bring it with us to Bali, sip it over the next couple of weeks to prevent a tummy infection.
That's cool. Well, you and I talked about that before. I think we did a whole podcast on like travel supplements, but I mean, that's where the enzymes, oregano oil, silver, those kind of things, binders would come in handy.
Yeah, we did a food poisoning podcast, I think about 2 years ago, I was at a friend's wedding, and I remember I was in the North End, and I had a nice ribeye steak in the North End. Right, anyone that knows the Boston area, North End's a big Italian area, big restaurant Italian area. Got a nice ribeye steak, and I ate it, and it was like someone punched me in the stomach. It was like, whoa, oh my gosh! Like I felt totally like just incredibly a lot of nausea, and then I brought my GI Clear 4 with me, and I hit that. I remember I had like two. I had my GI Clear 1 and then some oil of oregano, and I hit that hard. It didn't quite do it, and the next day I hit the GI Clear 4, and within 30 minutes it went away. I couldn't believe it. It was like someone flipped a switch. It's crazy. So sometimes you need synergistic herbs. Sometimes, the golden seal and the high dose berberines and some of the burdock root. It can really, really calm down the gut lining.
When people see my pantry or my cupboard full of different supplements, they'll look and they'll be like, oh my God, like this is crazy. You've got like 50, 60 bottles of stuff. And I'll tell them, look, I don't go to the doctor. I mean, if I'm dying, I'm going to go, but otherwise I'm going to be working on myself. And I think it's a very empowering thing to get experience and learn some of these herbs, learn some of these protocols. I just want people to not be fearful of sickness. I think a lot of times, even my wife this morning, I told her, I was like, honey, you're like freezing up because, here's my daughter vomiting and I'm running over there sprinting. I was on the other side of the house, but I'm sprinting over there with the trash can to give it to her because my wife was just kind of froze up. And I was like, no, you got to get yourself out of this freeze response. Don't be afraid of this. We got to help her through it. So I just want people listening to know that there's so many good options and things that we've done for thousands of years. We're not talking crazy stuff here. These are not new inventions that we're discussing. These are things that have been used traditionally in India and China and other countries for forever. So these are things that are so powerful that I would say in the majority of cases, you're not going to need to hit, as you mentioned, like IV antibiotics. That's on the extreme end of treatment. I think in most cases, these type of situations we're talking about will not lead to that level of intervention.
100%. So people listening here, hopefully you have some strategies regarding acute situations of vomiting or diarrhea. Now, why does one vomit over diarrhea? That's a great question. I mean, I would say the inflammation has to be more in the stomach area, upper intestinal tract for vomiting to occur, and probably the inflammation has to be more lower intestinal tract. Because once things have gone so far, right, you just have natural gravities and to move things downhill versus uphill. So I think a lot of that may depend upon where that inflammation is and how where all this toxic burden is in the intestinal tract. Higher up, I think, on the vomiting side, lower up on the diarrhea side. So either way, I think you're going to have similar root causes of why it's happening. And hopefully we gave you a couple ideas to kind of triage that.
Yeah, I would say certain infections just attack certain parts of the body more. Certain infections are going to go more for the stomach, like H. pylori. You're going to have more heartburn, indigestion type symptoms. You're not going to have so much diarrhea necessarily with H. pylori. Whereas something like Giardia or Crypto, those are to me going to be more intestinal based. You're going to, because those are intestinal parasites, so you have more diarrhea. So I think it depends on what you're dealing with too. And that's why we'll use some of the testing to, if this becomes more chronic, we'll use the testing to kind of guide us on what to do. Because if it's more tummy upset, we may do this set of blend, but if it's more colon, we might go this set. So there's kind of, that's the reason we have a toolbox, and that's the reason we have testing.
I like it. Well, if you guys are listening and you want to reach out deeper, you need some acute help, or you want to, get a long-term strategy to fix some of these chronic issues in your health, feel free, head over to evanbrand.com. Evan's available worldwide for consultation support. And again, I'm Dr. J. justinhealth.com is my site. Feel free. There'll be a little button to click and schedule. We're available worldwide. Again, we've been doing this for many, many years, many thousands of patients of feedback and support. And so we kind of have learned over the years. I tell you, in school, you develop a really good foundation, but then in practice, that's really where it gets you good, because you see so many people and you figure out what works and you develop the common themes, and you can just rinse and repeat that over and over again.
Yeah, getting your hands dirty, getting in the trenches. I mean, it's been a blessing for us. You and I learned so much from the people we work with. I mean, more than probably any book or any course. I mean, it's a real blessing to have. Like you said, once you see the trend of people, it's fun. It's really fun to help people. It's addicting. We love it.
100%. All right, guys, feel free to give us a share, thumbs up, like, put your comments down below. Let us know what you think, and we'll be back. Have a great day. Take care, y'all.
Take care now. Bye-bye.